Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure. So, welcome, Elina Grigoriou, to the Adventures of Self.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, I realized I just asked your name before we got started, your given name, and then I looked at your surname and I thought, gosh, I really don't know how to say this. But anyway, I gave it, as we say, a sophomore try.
I was surprised you didn't practice that. Usually people are that's the one people will ask me, and how do we pronounce your surname? And I was like, okay, well, if you didn't ask me that one, that's okay. Go for it. Well done.
Thank you. I'm actually just realizing that it won't show up, obviously, in listeners' ears, but you're wearing a very solid blue. I'm wearing a very solid yellow. So we're very primary colors today. I mean, we've got the red behind me, or maybe we just bring red into the mix. And I say that because, you are not exclusively, but you one of your specialties is in interior design. So I'm just noticing the color aspects of that. So yeah, I mean, what is let me just start off by how important is color in interior design?
I'll answer that, but why did you call it red? Why did you think of red?
Well, I'm saying that you have blue, I have yellow, so I think red is the other primary color.
Yeah, the primary. Yeah, I see. So I didn't catch that. Well, actually, and that's okay. Well, then I'll actually pivot off that. So primary colors, I would say, are used specifically to match a personal style. If they're of a particular type of personality, which usually will be rather definite, and where somebody is not wishy-washy about what they think, and or where you want a lot of activity going on. So the high contrast creates a lot of movement. And so color is really powerful when it comes to, of course, space and people's behavior, because it makes a big impact. It also, it's completely related to light and energy, because it's just a visible form of the energy that's not absorbed by mass. So it's just really, really interesting when you think about and you really understand what color is. It's not perhaps something that people think is a bit candy flossy. It's really scientific when you really understand its physics. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I confess to being one of those people who doesn't really understand color. I wore a lot of black, gray, rather drab colors through most of my teens and 20s, primarily because if I look back on it, it's because that's kind of how I felt at the time. I was feeling rather black and gray. And tan in my life. I remember my mother used to give me, like for Christmas presents, she would give me shirts and whatever, and they would be bright colors, and I would kind of moan and groan and say, well, Mom, and I would ask her to take them back, or I would begrudgingly accept them. And then she started buying me much more sort of muted colors. And then at some point, I mean, you pointed out, I've got a yellow jumper on, and at some point I just sort of chose, well, I'm gonna wear more bright colored things. I don't know why. It just happened.
How old were you when you did?
Oh, I don't know, in my 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, well into my 30s, I would say. I just decided, okay, well, I'm gonna wear something. And then my mother really struggled at Christmas because she was still getting me the kind of like drab kind of colors. Yeah. I don't understand why you would like these things now. Anyway,
color, we color is expression. So it's expressing us, and an interior, and how we, where we choose to go into, and what it's saying about us is basically a very strong combination and link that we make. So an interior is just an extension of what we're wearing. And especially our homes or workplaces or, clubs or pubs or shops you go to, we're making choices that we believe in or feel they're representing us. So interiors are an extension of our choices and what we believe and think about. So color is very much about that. And you tell a lot about a person, with what they're wearing. And if they are wearing what we'll call neutrals, and whites, blacks, grays, browns, anything in between, then I would say that, they're not wanting to stand out. What does it say about them? It says that. And I would say a lot of people think, oh, well, hide. But of course, no one's hide. And it may be a neutral color, and we say neutral, but it's a color still. It's speaking, it's saying something. And just to say, I went through a similar dark period in my teens. I was wearing black and long tweed coats. Hold on, the doorbell delivery, just a second. Oh, the code. Oh, okay, just a second. One 46 110. One 110. Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you. Very excitingly, a color meter.
Fantastic.
It is. And I've just thought, actually, I'm wearing my trousers are the same color as your top.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, there you go. So we were on some wavelength.
Yeah.
So you were speaking about
being actually similarly in a dark color and heavy tweed coats. And when I was a teenager too. And for me, that was definitely a period of introspection. And so I can understand perhaps my journey of going into color then. And funny enough, you said red, because then I went into a red period. And again, that was very much relating to perhaps how I was responding to life, and I loved red. I wanted red because it was firing me up. I wanted to get fired up to get into the world and really assert myself into life and into profession. And so red was my favorite color, and I really wanted it. And then I guess I was trying to sort of taper that down, control it, because I was being too much. I was damaging relationships. I was hurting myself, and so then that became, okay, I need to cool myself down. And then I went into a blue period, I guess, in my 30s. And I guess I'm in one now where I'm balancing a bit of those and going away from primary colors and going into warmer colors with a bit of gray and feeling more myself. So it's it's been really, really interesting.
Yeah, I don't personally, I don't necessarily have. I mean, like I've gone, I think, through some phases, and I do have certain colors I like, but I don't really have much rhyme or reason. I mean, I don't really think when I look at a shirt and a pair of pants or something. I mean, it's usually, well, I guess I usually wear blue jeans, but not always. I may wear trousers, and I don't really think, well, does this go? That I really think that well. But I will say there, I just because I'm just remembering, I'm actually seeing the shirt. It's hanging over here. When I was remodeling, renovating my apartment, which happened most of last year, and a very good friend of mine is an architect, and we were talking about the design for it. And we were talking about color, and I remember thinking, I have absolutely no idea what to do. Like, I know what I would like, but I have no idea how to get there. And what he did, he said, well, let's start with one of your favorite shirts. And we did. And there's a Hawaiian shirt that is hanging. I can see it. It's interesting that because it was warm here in London a couple of days ago. So I decided that it was already summer and I was going to I was going to wear my summer attire, and we used that as sort of the basis for the colors that we use in the flat, and so it was interesting. I mean, I really appreciated it. I had to be led to it. There's no way that I would have come to that myself, but I really appreciated being led to it because,
Mm.
and there's not a lot of color. I mean, it's a pretty neutral renovation and flat, and most of the cabinetry is all birch plywood, but there's some elements of select color, and I really appreciate it because not only do I connect with it, but like there's this because now there's a story to it. And it's like it even it's interesting. It's coming up because it's like it followed me here.
The
The shirt,
t-shirt.
yeah, oh, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, when you're working, I mean, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. And also, like
Mm.
when you're working with people, how do you work with them in terms of getting their
Mm.
story into a design?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think the approach your friend took was a very good one, and I think that was nice to hear that it was about he was focusing on you, not
Mm,
on what he thought he wanted.
mm,
So because that is definitely a choice, as anybody, you could say, well, I'm going to create something here that I think is right, and that's not necessarily about the person who's going to live in the space.
mhm,
And it could be about just some general ideas or something somebody has always wanted to create in a physical way.
mhm,
So, and I think that's a very conscious choice designers need to make. And I think we're getting better at talking about it in the industry. And there's a growing number of designers and architects who are now understanding that difference. What are you going in the industry to do? To create a space for your own vanity, for your ego,
mm,
just because you want to spend somebody else's money to create something that's three-dimensional, or because actually you care about the lives and how people are going to feel inside the spaces you're creating. So I think to start off with, that's a very important distinction to make for any creative, and especially somebody who's doing an interior,
mm,
because 80-90% of our lives are actually lived inside these
mhm,
spaces, and so they're constantly affecting you.
mhm,
Even a white wall is affecting you. The fact that it's white and not a color, not a cream, not a pink, a green or blue, it's making a difference to you. So I think people who choose, oh, I'm just going to paint everything white, thinking it's not going to be an effect,
mm,
actually don't realize that it is going to be an effect.
mm,
Um, so I think that's really important. And so bringing back to perhaps my approach, from very early on in my career, I think I wanted to be an interior designer because of that intersection between people and space. And I just started having very big doubts about the way we were being encouraged, and the way I was trained up in at university about what good design meant. And so all that questioning was, well, it should be about the people,
mm,
and I wanted to be about the people. And I think I was just brought up like that, care for others. That was just a default state that I should have. And so for the first 10 years of my career, I think I sort of started the questioning and the learning and the how and the why of what I was doing, whom for, and then how should I do it.
mm,
And that then at the transition of creating my own business then became something I really, really focused on and honed in as a choice, and where I really started working much more persistently to find out, how do I do that? And then that's brought up, which I think would be of interest here, is that sort of parallel of work of, well, finding out what makes a human happy,
mm,
and then what's the effect of the interior space on that objective. So what is the role of every interior space and the architecture surrounding it in the objective of sort of well-being, which is perhaps the aim that I refer to. And so I guess to give you the ending of that, it's the role we have as designers is to support the well-being and comfort of occupants. We cannot give it. I cannot give well-being, but what I can do is provide support or remove it. So of course, if I'm removing, so provide support of comfort or remove it. So remove the comfort that somebody experiences inside an interior. And that will be physical comfort, mental comfort, or emotional comfort. So we have to have all three. Otherwise, you're only targeting one part of a human being. What about the others? And so that's the role of interiors, to support basically the comfort of the emotions, the comfort of your mind. I am splitting them for general terms here, and of the body. So
a really interesting way. I mean, it's quite holistic approach to interior design. And you mentioned that in your studies and perhaps in your first years of practice, there wasn't necessarily, you weren't taught that, you weren't given that. It was it was what? It was about the aesthetic, it was about the look, it was about the cost,
it was all the kind of sort of process-led issues, so which were all very useful, I guess. I mean, I always think the most important thing I got out of university was how to think, how to do creative thought.
Okay.
And that was a really tough lesson my course leader taught me, but I appreciate it. And the rest of it really was just, we could have done it in a week, considering what you learn once you start working. But I mean, I think that now, I'm sure I didn't think it then. So it was very much about style. Yes, it was like, oh, look at this style, and has this style got sort of design fluidity about it? So does that mean the aspects of the style all tie together, if that makes sense? Which were valid issues, but the objective of the style and why we were doing it, and why would you work really hard, to keep it true, those were not taught. It wasn't about user-centered. So
and how has that user-centered attitude come in? Has it I mean, because I can imagine it could come in from sort of it breaking from the top down, like that people just aren't happy with what they're being given and provided by designers or architects or whomever, builders, and also it can kind of seep in. Excuse me, it can seep in from the sides, from the designers themselves, who say, oh well, we would like to deal with a, like you say, a more user focused approach to design.
I think a lot of people are understanding the word well-being to be a bit of a trigger now. And actually that means that, I'll be okay, or this is going to be for me. I think it's a very big umbrella word that suddenly means that they'll have less problems inside the space and they'll have less dissatisfaction. But I don't think that they understand much more than that. I think a lot of people have experienced spaces where they have had problems with it. They just dislike it. They have an aversion, for how it looks. They think it's to this or to that, whatever that may be. So I would think that those are the broader thoughts that people tend to come with, plus those holiday pictures of the hotel rooms. There's always that, oh my God, I love this space here. So it's a magazine, with offcuts and a lookbook, they call it, or something like that, which is actually helpful, but it won't be, I'll probably see that, and then I'll put that to the side in a way, and then take them through a process of defining their user profile. So looking at them as a human being, and that's the psychology, that'll be the way they'll express themselves, the choices they would make, what they're drawn to. And that could be from some specifically chosen photos that I have curated that have extreme design characteristics, such as very high asymmetry or very high balance, or have really deep textures or very shallow textures, And so all these are ways of people expressing themselves. It's a language. It's like music. It's like food. It's everything. And so you put all this together, and usually it comes together as a palette of behavior, of likes and dislikes, and that immediately gives me that the song sheet, I guess, to then understand how I'll interpret that into the design details, in the palettes, in the user experience inside the space. And I think the most important thing is to know then how to ask questions and what questions to ask them, because it gives me a direction. It just sort of directs my compass.
And I mean, I suppose that comes through time. One thing that you keep mentioning, because it's quite interesting, because it ties into a lot of the work I do, and I think we spoke about this briefly on our call a little while ago, was this idea around choice. So you keep bringing in this idea around this concept of choice, that you've got choice, the user has choice, and how important choice is.
Yes, very much so. I think as soon as we don't, two things on that. One, what are the choices we're conscious of? And then why are we making them? What kind of, what ideas do we hold in our minds about which choice is the right one? So I think that's one issue I'd like us to address. And the other one is, of course, the choices we don't know we have yet. And then, and I think in that, on that aspect, I have the responsibility as a design consultant to bring awareness to the clients to see the choices they have. And the more they understand these choices, the more it will be a good fit for them. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of, because sometimes I get a little lost in abstraction, so it's helpful for me to, it's just my own puny mind.
No, I love practical examples, yes.
Good. Because I'm just thinking in terms of, like, as I said, I recently renovated my my apartment. And obviously there were a lot of choices that had to be made. And getting from...
I think let's talk about choice fatigue also. I think that we should talk about that. Sorry.
Choice for...
Fatigue. People get tired of too many choices. So there's a point where choices actually are not helpful.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, and it's like we all want we all want this idea of freedom of choice, right? We want to be able to choose, and but there is a sense of, well, there's either too much choice in the sense that there are too many things to choose from. So that's what I was talking about earlier, where it was like, well, what kind of colors do you want, Taylor? I was like, I don't know. My friend, I remember, sent me a website for, I don't remember the name of the, there's many of them that, color, whatever. And, I looked it up, and it was like, we have 16 million colors available. I was like, 16 million? What am I going to do with that? Like, I can't make any logical, because then you get into, like, well, here are the 73,000 purples. Here are the 47,000 light greens, and here are the 112,000 like dark greens. And you're like, oh my God! Like,
so immediately the things I would guide anyone through, and I think is so important, is to understand, first of all, what narrow things down, and what narrows things down is whether you, I would say, fall into one of four groupings of colors and palettes and personality, and that helps me, and that will be a particular palette of color. Some colors that don't have any gray in them, for example. Some colors that are full of primaries, some colors that actually got no primaries at all and no gray at all. Some that are very high saturation or very low saturation. Then others that have got very high contrast or tone on tone. And then, so that, those are just one kind of series of things I would consider. But I don't give that as a choice to the client. Those would be my kind of process of elimination that I'm making when I understand the personality that I'm working with. And so I would trim that down and show them a particular palette. And then it's about, okay, well, what is the lifestyle? What are the activities that this person wants to be doing in here? And that's really important, because the space that we live in is just a tool. And I think we forget about that. It is a tool. It's like a knife, a glass, a shoe, It's just another tool in which we're going to live our lives. So the question I always put out to clients is, well, what do you want it to do for you? And literally we break it down then to what I call the user profile activities. And sorry, UPA is acronym galore. so I'll say the full thing. So user profile activities, and that could be from sleeping well. That is an activity you're going to do, and we want you to do that to 100% of your ability. And entertainment.
So it's interesting, just right there, because the activity is sleeping or cooking, eating. But it's
doing
interesting
yoga.
but you're bringing in sleeping well, right? It's like how to maximize that.
There's a performance then, absolutely. So first of all, we understand, well, what are the activities we want to be doing? It could be about communication. I want to be able to communicate well with my friend or my colleague or my client or whoever. So what does that communication well mean? What are you actually doing? So I really break it down to the smaller little part of that activity. So it could be active listening. It could be having good physical, sort of visual connection. It could be about feeling physically rested. If you think actually what it takes to do something well, then you understand the kit of parts. And that's what really I need to know. I need to understand that. And I guide clients through that. And it really raises awareness. They become really mindful of what actually they're doing and how they're living and what they want to be doing. And so it's a really supportive process. And it's facilitation, absolutely that. But what it gives me to understand is then what my brief is, because my brief then as a designer is to create this space that's basically going to support these absolutely fine activities, feelings, and cognitive performances. And I know from the physical characteristics of a space what I need to do. So I know then the ingredients and the recipe of all the little things I need to tweak, whether that's ventilation, air quality, light aspects, the furniture layout, the height of the seating, the relationship between seats to each other, all sorts of details then that I tweak and set to support what this group of people want.
Yeah, and you brought up support, because it just takes me back to what you were talking about earlier, how you don't provide well-being.
No.
That even, I suppose, does the space provide well-being?
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well, because that's
the person who has to take responsibility. And the process, the facilitation process, in a way of us breaking down the activities and understanding what they're after, actually creates that awareness of that dynamic relationship that they need to have. So we talk through, well, what do you want to be doing in here? Oh, well, I want to be doing this, I want to be doing that, I want to feel this way, I want to achieve this. All those things. So we say, oh, okay, so what does that involve? And this and that? Okay, yes. So that process itself makes them really self-conscious. They'd really become conscious of what it is they're saying they want to be doing. So it's really, so it works hand in hand then with them understanding that to do that, they need to actively either get up or do that, or, not sit here and press a button and thinking everything's going to respond to their, order, if that makes sense. And I think as what I have seen over the last decade, or I don't know if it was before that, but I'm more focused on it on the last decade or 15 years, I guess, is the fact that we've become a culture where we do think we're going to press a button like air conditioning and everything's going to kind of come to call. We've become this species where a button on our phone changes everything, and I think it's and that has come from really positive reasons to make life better, but I think we are overusing it and not then understanding how we need to come forwards to also become engaged and active.
Well, it takes me back to, and I definitely agree with that, and see that in a lot of different areas. It takes me back to what you mentioned with your schooling, that it was all process. So, if we take the human out of it, right? I mean, you can see it
Mhm.
in all sorts of things. I mean, you mentioned, phones, and how everything kind of becomes, well, whatever you, we're gonna measure you and determine what is right for you, rather than, an individual taking
Seeing you.
responsibility. Yeah, well, yeah, and rather than an individual taking responsibility for himself or herself, about, because it goes back to choice.
Yes.
And there's this idea, it's like, well, I just push a button, and the
Mm.
thing I want comes, or arrives, or opens, or
Mm.
turns on, or whatever, and therefore all my problems are taken away by that.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe that happens
I
with people. It doesn't happen with me.
Well, this is where we're at. I think we're on a journey where we've become much more sophisticated, and
Mm,
we've got many more sophisticated tools. We have much more refined knowledge about who we are and what we can actually do, literally, what can we achieve.
mm,
And I think we've developed that knowledge and the refinement of what we need to do that. And I think we're in that sort of process where we're not communicating this both ways. So an example, I think this is very obvious, is in the use of artificial intelligence and all our devices, and the
mm,
permissions element of
mm,
what data you're going to share. How, the digital body. I know there's a few people who call this. We have a digital body out there,
mm,
and with all the data that exists,
mm,
and how much of this then is used for our comfort
mm,
without misuse, and how much of it do we want to give permission out there. But it has to be our choice then,
mm,
to say, well, I'm going to give you permission for this, but I'm not going to give you permission for that. So we have to actively engage in that decision making, I think,
mm,
to then maximize, well, how much we're going to be comfortable with, being out there, how much tailoring services do we
mm,
receive.
mm,
And it's exactly the same with interiors. The more you share and the more open and more accessible you are, the more the spaces can form themselves around you. And this
mm,
is not just the sort of what I call bricks and mortar, but it's also the actual functions. So the lighting. I mean, the lighting here for my home is smart lighting.
mm,
So it kind of changes to what I've set it to do now in my needs.
mm,
Whether it's movement censored or temperature or
mm.
just my mood. I'll change the lighting to my mood, and I think that, but it needs another layer of knowledge, and because it's a new thing. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's new, so people can say, "Oh my God, this is so, problematic or difficult or whatever." But it's because you're learning a new language,
Mm.
and so we do have to apply ourselves, I think, to get more out of these smart systems. But if we don't apply ourselves, then they can be, I think, quite impacting, on our lives, more so than something simpler.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, the lighting example you
Mm.
gave, because you've got an understanding about, well-being and interior design and color and lighting, and so coming to, put something like that into your house, into your home.
Mhm.
um there First of all, you've got, like, a foundational understanding of what different things can do, and maybe then an aptitude to go figure out how the system works.
A
Whereas,
lot of a lot of testing going on here. Yes.
yeah, and whereas a lot of people, they buy something, or they get sold something, and then, you don't really. I mean, I've got things that I've bought, or, have come to me, and I don't actually really know how they work that well, and so I don't really use them that well,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I don't. And maybe, now it's like old dog, new tricks, right?
Oh.
But but also because there are so many things, right? It goes back to that, like, choice fatigue, right? That
Mm.
if there are too many things to make decisions on, then we just kind of abandon certain
Yeah,
things,
absolutely.
but they can still impact us. And I think that's what you're saying, right? And particularly,
Yeah.
there are big things that can impact us quite considerably.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, this is a classic that relates to sustainability itself, actually. One of the biggest issues around achieving sustainable results over the last, I'd say, 10 years has been this kind of mismatch between development of really smart technology but you need a PhD to be able to operate things. And so people will just override them because all they want is to be hot or cold, you know. And so they'll just like, I can't deal with this. You know, my family's like in the residential settings, especially, they'll be like, well, I don't know how to work this. I'm just going to override everything. And it's just going to be hot and really hot. And they'll just open the windows, you know, to get some colder air in. And this is a classic. There's so many case studies in projects, you know, with lessons learned in them, which are all around this, where we've made things too clever sometimes for the wrong use. You know, there's a mishmash between complexity and user. And we have to be a bit clever. You know, it's not that something that's full of bells and whistles is right for everybody. It doesn't mean it's going to make them happy, and we're not going to get the sustainable result we're after.
And we hadn't really touched much on sustainability in this because although you have an aesthetic design aspect and you're focused on the well-being of users, you also have quite an interest in sustainability, which is one of the other ways that we overlap. Because, as I said, when we spoke, I did a master's in environmental architecture, but around sustainability. So it's quite interesting to me, and I know that there is a lot that's being done in that. Although, like you were saying, one of the things I found was that a lot of things that purported to be sustainable, often, there was like you were saying, there was so much effort and technology and kind of over engineering going into things that it was hard for me to, I'm sure somebody could justify the sustainability of something because it saved X number of watts or something, but it just felt like it was overcomplicating things. So, and I think there's this real, mix with technology. It's like there's this opportunity for technology to really create sustainable ends, and yet there is also this human element of kind of, maybe we don't need all the technology all the time.
I think it's all about the human element, really, because technology is just a tool, and it's just going to reflect ideas, isn't it, really, of a human being. It's having so much on this. I think on one hand, I can't fault people for trying to do better. I think I'm going to bring the E word into this, ego. So I think ego kind of takes over sometimes, and the intentions go astray. And we do then overcomplicate things because we load things with our ideas. And this overlaps with both environmental issues and well-being issues. So I think we can have a solution that is trying to minimize, the environmental impact, or even be positive, have a positive environmental impact. And we can also have a approach that is working with somebody's nature or nurture. And this is part of actually designing for well-being, is for me to suss out, well, how much of what they're saying, they're expressing, is what they think they should be like. And they're sort of very much battling and constantly trying to contain their nature. And how much of it is, actually them being in harmony with who they are and owning who they are. And so we'll create a space that will be sustainable because they won't keep trying to change it to project a shell that's not real. So by default, it will be moving all the time because it can't settle. And so this is, and so well-being is an inherent part of a sustainable result. So both because it would reflect what's true, and also it will be, if we're talking about length of issues and life cycles, then it will be kept for longer, and it will be appreciated, and it will be taken care of. Things that we like and things that feel right, we take care of them. And so even if you don't keep it forever, because you know what, after 3 or 4 years, you've developed into a different person. You've been more of yourself. And so then maybe you pass it on to somebody else, and that's great. I think that's really good. I think sustainable interiors get the wrong idea when people think they've got to keep something, for 10 or 15 years or 20 years or life, because we change as people, we do. And change, I mean, as hopefully in the right way, as in coming closer to who we are and evolving and growing as people. And so the space around us needs to reflect this. It needs to support that growth. It's like art. Art is about truth, right? We see art and we look at it and it speaks to us because it's completing answers inside ourselves that we're trying to find. And so space is doing that. That's exactly what's the potential with a physical space. It's to do exactly what art is doing to you. Is to complete those questions and answers and help you uncover those and be yourself.
Yeah. This keeps bringing something up for me. Do you think this is a real challenge for most people? Because
is self-knowledge the biggest challenge? Are you asking?
Okay, maybe, yeah, but because it's presented in terms of, how do you want your apartment to look? How do you want your office to look? Right. And people have an idea, right? You say they come to it, that lookbook or, concept of it's
sometimes, or an objective.
Something,
I want
right?
something that's going to be professional, or I want something.
And because when you were talking earlier about how people, you asked them about how they want to interact with a particular environment, and there was this sense I got from you that it's almost a bit intrusive. Because people are like, whoa, well, I'm not sure I really want to tell you what I'm going to do in this space, right? Because we kind of, it's like we can think of the magazine sort of look of something, or the idealized look of something, because it's not necessarily a lived-in space. I mean, some of them are, obviously, but and when you get down to questions about, well, what are you actually going to use this for? Right? It's a bit sort of like, whoa, well, who are you to ask, right? And also, if there's this the other side of this, or another side of this that was coming up for me, is, as you were just speaking, this sense that how do I say this? Well, is it, this concept of well-being, right? It's actually it goes into the person, rather than it being about what it looks like, what the color, what the furniture, what kind of lamp you have. I mean, those things are
authenticity.
Fine. Yeah, but because that authenticity starts. I mean, that's inside. I mean, yes, you can have an authentic look.
No, authenticity outside too.
Yeah.
You're being authentic, as in what you're saying you like.
Yeah.
You're being true to yourself, kind of thing. It's like, I'll say I like this. I don't really like it, but I think she wants me to say that I like it. Or I think my neighbors would like this, so I'm going to say I like this. Or, well, what do I want my clients to think of me? And these are the kind of clients I want to attract. So then I'll choose these things instead of, well, what are your values, instead of that.
And then with that, do people come back to you and say, well, I'm not happy in the place, I'm not happy in my space? And is it then because to me, there's a sense that people would invariably, because there's that lack of authenticity, that there's a mismatch that's going to come out of the finished product.
Well, I haven't had a client who then has a mismatch, as far as I'm aware. So,
well, then you're doing your job well.
Well, no. Sorry, I think that's not possible. It's not possible not to have a mismatch, because I'm, sorry, I'm not perfect. So, I know for sure, that there will be an element of a mismatch, but the process is trying to reduce that, and also, it's not a fixed time. It's everything's moving all the time. And even the process itself, the design process itself, is a journey in which the clients are changing because of the questions we're asking, because of what they're considering and the discussions they're having between themselves. So even in that time alone, they're evolving. And then you've got the moment that you sort of fix the design, you're like, okay, we're going to have to draw a line now and build something, and then the time then it takes to deliver it and build it. And that can be between, minimum of 6 months to 2 or 3 years sometimes. And so people change in that time too. And, you do, and that's factored in, to a degree. You factor in as much as you can of that. But it's always going to be change. And so when the kind of questions that I do ask and the kind of issues that I raise are issues that will reduce that amount of disharmony, because it's actually much more close to home than something else. And so it has more legs to it as far as disharmony. What I'd like to raise, though, is the issue perhaps before about trust. And that sort of very intimate relationship that does get created. And I mean, I don't think that in any business relationship we shouldn't have that trust. It doesn't matter what it is. If we're not connecting authentically, with anybody, me and my suppliers or me and my clients, for me, it's going to be, I do very much respond to them in a similar way. They're partners. And one pays me, otherwise I pay others, but I'm reliant on both of them equally. So I think that, yeah. So I think an upfrontness, an openness from my part is really important. I won't ask anybody to be open to me unless I'm open to them. And I think it's my responsibility to create this safe space where they can investigate these options and they can find out what's going to be the right answer. And I'm very conscious of that space, of that responsibility and the trust they give me, to do that.
And I mean, just curious, I mean, how did you come to that? Because I don't imagine that's something you were taught as a process at school. Maybe I'm wrong.
No. I don't, you know what? The process of which actually exactly?
Well, I think creating that space for clients. I mean, that's because I don't want to, judge other people, but so I don't really know, right? I mean, I've had my own experience with designers, and it's not really about that. But there is, like you were talking about, how with a lot of people in design, it's much more about the style and the aesthetic of something, and that may, that would go to, well, this is what I should say. Right. This is how it should look. This is what my clients would want, or this is what Elina probably wants me to say for me to look a particular way. Right. Where what you're saying is you're creating a space so that somebody has the opportunity to say, "Gosh, I actually don't really like that. I thought I did, or it seems like I should, but I actually don't. And what I really want is this other thing," or whatever.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. And I think I do feel like I fail if suddenly I realize they've told me something that they think I want to hear, or that, that I feel like, oh my God, no, I've been too pushy, or I've been too, I've driven the answer too much one way or the other, so I'm really self-conscious about what questions I'm asking so I don't lead them. But at the same time, that brings us back to the issue we talked about earlier on, about choice. If you don't frame a specific area that is perhaps the, from all the choices they've got, perhaps the one that's the closest to, and that's my experience, then that's the analysis of what I'm hearing, and I have to then bring myself into that decision-making process to reduce some of the, the field, and narrow it down for them to then play in a smaller space, that feels right for them and comfortable to them, and things like that. Because not everybody wants to play in a big space. Some people get overwhelmed by it.
Yeah,
and others.
Yeah, and oftentimes you're dealing with quite big spaces because I'm sort of, in my experience, I'm thinking of the, my apartment, which is my own space, so it's fairly limited. But you're often dealing in commercial, quite large
Yeah.
spaces that may be, buildings or multiple floors and
Auditoria and yes,
yeah,
multiple
yeah, yeah, yeah,
floors and
yeah, yeah.
airplane fuselages and yeah, all sorts.
Okay, yeah,
Churches. I've done it all. I've done churches, car showrooms, single flats, single houses. I've done what else have I done? Gosh, I've done training centers, as I said, with the airplane parts inside there to train the evacuation slides and everything.
okay,
You name it. I've done so much. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
fascinating field to be in.
yeah. And well, just to kind of take a bit of a sidetrack because we've been
Mm-hmm.
on this and we spoke about this. Um, I know you have had a particular interest in what you call practical philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking earlier about, I mean, I was saying it sometimes I struggle with kind of the abstract concepts, and so trying to make things concrete. So I don't know, actually, I don't even know what practical philosophy is. Um, so
This is what we've been describing, actually.
oh, well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, like in a sense, I think the question I didn't answer for you, I feel that you asked just now or earlier, was about where did I learn
Mm.
to do this, right? To create the space to.
Well, I mean, how I don't know where, right? Because that feels like a bit reductivist, but how did you come to that? Because you spoke about, I mean, it's like one of the things we spoke about earlier was
Mm,
like we're on this journey, right? So you
mm,
didn't start where you are now.
mm,
You had an experience like whenever you decided to go to school for this,
mm,
worked in for presumably reputable companies
mhm.
and did lots of big projects where things were a particular way, and you started your own company,
Yeah.
which is doing, so you have a lot of flexibility and freedom in that, although there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that as well.
Yes. Um, so um, I think I learned. I think there's definitely certain elements that were just part of my nature, and I use that obviously very specifically. The whatever this limited being has been given,
Mm.
and I was questioning a lot of things since I was perhaps early teens. Hence, I guess the black mood. But I've always been extremely. I've been a thinker. I've been somebody who cares a lot, and then so my challenge was always to try and I have a lot of power, and so my challenge was always to try and manage all of that in a way that's constructive, not destructive.
Mm.
And then in that process, because I cared, I wanted to please everybody around me. So then I started, which I think I mentioned to you once before, in a previous phone call, that I ended up in my late 20s of closing myself in this box, and smaller box, because I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to do everything right and trying to sort of pull myself back all the time, because I guess, I whatever I was trying to do wasn't quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's where I came across practical philosophy over dinner. A friend said, "Oh, you'd like this course," um, and I just don't know why I went. I don't know why I thought it would be the thing. It's not what I used to do. And I just remember then the first term of doing these sort of classes, just leaving thinking my mind's blown and everything makes sense now.
Mm.
And it just gave me, and I think philosophy is just a way of thought, and it's sort of helping. For me, what practical philosophy has given me is tools that I can create a framework where I can think through things instead of going around in circles.
Yeah.
It feels like more of a helix now, where you kind of go up, it's a spiral that's growing out and
Mm-hmm.
going up,
Mm-hmm.
and in that process, I guess I've just learned to clear clarity within myself, who I am and what I'm working with. The fact that I'm not my mind, I'm not my emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not this body.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as I can see the distinction between the I and all of that, then immediately creates a field of work. And so for me, that's that space, that I gave myself, through through those, the years of work that I've done. I mean, it's been now probably 12 years or so of work, where I've been relentlessly working on myself. I'm very, full force on everything, and that was no exception. And very tough, but extremely rewarding. Self-knowledge. And so that, I guess, has given me the understanding of what human nature is likely to be made up of. It's made me much more conscious and able to see more in other people. And so I guess just that experience of my personal understanding, and then, within, I tutor philosophy now, so I guess I'm listening and learning a lot about people. And that just, it adds into understanding people more, I guess. And, it's just a small little fraction of what's there, but just to grow it, keep growing that understanding, keep growing how I can help more people. And I guess that's definitely what drives me.
Yeah, it's nice. It's beautiful. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the word that we work on ourselves, and it's like because there's this, the idea is that we are freeing ourselves, that we are connecting to ourselves. I think what you were talking about, this disconnect you had in your late 20s, sounded like, you were pleasing lots of other people, which means, well, I don't know if it necessarily means, but I think what you described to me was that you weren't pleasing yourself. You weren't.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so then there becomes this digression, right? It's a very beautiful, noble thing to want to please other people, or not necessarily please, but to
it is. It's pleasing other people. Absolutely. Yeah.
But I don't know if that necessarily is a noble thing, but being compassionate, being considerate, being kind to other people is a noble gesture. But it doesn't mean anything if there's like no gas in the tank, right? If it's
excluding ourselves, it's not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was the lesson I learned. I wasn't including myself in the pleasing of this world.
Yeah.
So yes.
And I think that happens with a lot of pleasers.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, 100%. And I can read them now for miles, It's like, oh, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And teaching self-love, and that self-recognition, that self-knowledge. And that for me has become amazing. I mean, the power that's inside that too is like, yes, the freedom, the power. Yeah.
Well, the thing that comes, like I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about choice, because it's what I started to talk about, a little story vignette, like in the renovation of my place, because there, even before we had drawings, right? My architect and I sat down and we talked about things, and I'd been living in the space, it's a 1930s building, and been living in the space for years. So I kind of had a sense about how I wanted to renovate it. And then he came up with some initial drawings. We talked about things. So there was there's a long process, and then that went on, and eventually to designers and builders and all sorts of things. And it as you were saying, like, it twisted and turned all over the place from beginning to end. I mean, there's right. not, I mean, there are certain elements, I'm sure, that were consistent from beginning to end, but there's so many things that changed. But the thing that was the most useful for me was awareness. So because awareness about something actually, gives meaningful choice. Because we can choose something. We can say, well, I'm going to choose this. I'm going to choose this color. I'm going to choose this designer. But if there's no awareness about, like, well, what's leading that? What's the basis for that? Because there are certain things, like, now that that renovation is complete, there's certain things that I look at and I think, I think I made I'm just going to put in, quotes, like the quote unquote wrong choice, right? Like this, what actually came out of it doesn't serve me as I thought it would. But actually, if I were to go back 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, I may not have been aware of how that was going to actually fit and what decision we were making. Well, and what's amazing, actually, this kind of goes against my point, but is that there are other things, or maybe awareness was happening on different levels, because there are other things that I could not have foreseen that turned out magically, amazingly much better than I ever imagined. And we did have to make a choice on some level, and so there were certain things that, like, we made choices on things that then down the road made other things that we hadn't even imagined, that sort of problems that came up, they made those things so much simpler to deal with because of the choices we'd made, months before or something.
Okay.
Anyway, I've kind of sort of thrown a lot in there.
I don't know. Is there a question, or do you want me just to comment on the choice?
Often, no, that's kind of the way I end up speaking most of the time. People are saying, like, "Did you ask me a question?" I said, "No, it's just it's conversation. These are conversational."
Yeah, no. I'm gonna take your bat.
podcasts.
I'll take your bat. And but I'll add to that. And what came to mind when you were saying that was that the unpredictability of some things, and how it's the chess game. How well do you know how to play the chess game, and how do you know which actions are going to produce other actions further down the line? And some things these days I know from what's happened, but that's a trap in itself, because no two situations are ever the same. And so you could say, well, okay, I know that there's going to be a consequential impact, from this thing that in the first instance would produce what we're going to call, again, in quotes, right result. But actually, you know what, in a year's time or 2 years' time, it's going to really piss the hell out of them. So, and that could be from a color, from a pattern, from the layout, from the lack of storage. It could be all sorts of things, right? And they sound trivial, but especially if it's a home and you're living and breathing that every day, whoa, the anger that builds up, and that is exhausting to live like that, with that anger simmering there, and it's every day, all the time. Now, choice comes back into that, and this is where we do have this sort of dynamic relationship with our spaces, because then you make a choice that you're going to let it affect you, and put that in context, or you know what, it's affecting you so much, are you going to stop? It's worth changing, and take the bull by the horns and make that change. And so I think a lot of us bear this pain, which slowly gets higher. And that's even with, physical body pain, right? A back, an ankle, or a stiff neck or something. And before we know it, we can barely put our trousers on, or we can barely move. And it's like, where did this come from? And suddenly you're in agony, and it's just creeped on. And I think just that daily awareness of saying, you know what, no, this is uncomfortable. And you know what? I don't want this. And I can do something very simple right now to stop it building. And I think when we're not conscious, we allow things to go way beyond what we'll call a manageable state. And then we're exploding, and things then are breaking, and that could be a relationship breaking because of the anger that builds up between two people. Storage is a classic. I've had 2 or 3 instances with clients where, the issue of storage and the whole discussion of things being left out or put away, comes into play. And it's such a trigger for arguments and dissatisfaction and really bad communication between couples. And it's all about space. And the solution is in first of all, giving a platform for both to express and be heard. And so I feel as many times I'm doing couple therapy. It's hilarious. It really is. And just facilitate that conversation for everybody to say what they need to say, and then question and do reasoning, sort of Plato's dialectic I'll bring into that. And so in that, we slowly find solutions that they didn't know that, were there, because they've both looked at it from one point of view. And instead of saying, okay, well, let's step out from this point of view, and what about if we look at it this way? And you just go round and you go up on it and down of it. And then suddenly there's a solution there that both of them are really happy with, hadn't thought about, and it's like, done. And I think it's that sort of simplicity that, becoming aware of what's going on, what are people doing, what are people saying, and then looking at a broader picture can actually become then a positive impact. So I don't know where I've taken what you were saying before, but yeah, I'm adding that to it.
Cool.
Over to you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think what it comes to me is that, with because we talk about consciousness, is that there's an opportunity to see that we have choice. Now, sometimes that choice can be overwhelming. Sometimes that choice can be paralyzing, or there can be too much choice. There can be not enough decision about the choice. But when we,
and not available, I'm going to add that it's not available sometimes. We can't see it. Definitely. I can't see many choices still. I know that.
Yeah, but I think that's why, like in a situation like this, why we work with somebody, right? Because I don't know the choices I have to make. So that's why I bring in a designer, an architect, a builder, whatever, whomever.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
To do things. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, there are choices we know we have, and there are choices that we're not aware of. And the thing that I guess to end on is that, having those choices, there's a responsibility and there's a freedom in those. So, because otherwise, then things are the problem is because of something else or something outside of us, right? The temperature control, how we feel.
Yeah, and I think this is where power comes into play, and in exercising the power we have, and responsibility and power, I think, are obviously two sides of the same coin. I would say. I think many times when we avoid taking responsibility and relinquishing power, we feel we begrudge that, but it goes together. So if you want to have power, you have to take responsibility for the results of those. But also, if you want to take responsibility, well, you're given this extra power, and so I think, and I think that within that also, then you've got clarity. I think as soon as we take power, it means we're connecting with ourselves, and that for me immediately means there's that harmony, that direct communication, inside, and I'm just at one with my choices. What I say and what I feel are in line with each other, and so it's much clearer inside of me. So there's less confusion, there's less busyness, there's less noise, and so by consequence, I can act more clean cut, and so it's much more effective and then powerful. So that, I don't know if that.
I really like that idea. It's like when we take power, we connect with ourselves.
Absolutely, the self is power. I mean, the more I'm honest to myself, and the more I make myself vulnerable to myself, the more powerful I am. And this, I think, is the word of ego, isn't it? Trying to cut off, the I, the perceived I, the ego I, the small I, I'll call it small I, to what I'll call a source, of the self, consciousness. And we are less powerful when we're connected to it, because it's constant and everything. And so the more we allow the ego to be the dominant and dictate the valve, it's trying to close it because it wants to have the control. The more we allow the valve to be open, the ego, of course, thinks it's going to lose, but it doesn't. It gets stronger and it's more at peace with itself in a way. It can then not have so much weight on it, and it's less painful. So I think then it's kind of just this amazing, power and energy and oneness and light and greatness. I love it. It's fabulous. And that just means just being kind to ourselves, being kind to that ego, being kind, and then being stronger because of it. So yeah.
That, I think, is a beautiful place to end. I really appreciate what you have to say there. So, Elina, thank you very much for coming on. Elina Grigoriou from Grigoriou Interiors. Thanks again, and we will see you somewhere down the road.
Thank you.